Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be addressing juvenile corrections. So I don't think the book totally does it justice getting into the entire corrections system. Generally, when we think about corrections, we're looking at jails, the jail confinement, what that is like, what's the day-to-day of the inmates, what's the day-to-day of the employees, the administration. And this chapter, interestingly, diverts from that. And what it really starts to focus on is kind of alternatives to what we would think about as your classic corrections being the jail. It's looking at things like probation, residential and day treatment programs, and aftercare. And again, here we are opening up Pandora's box of the criminal justice bureaucracy. So, as we've discussed, when we're thinking about the bureaucracy that has been socially constructed, the institution that is the juvenile justice system, you're thinking about the prosecutor side, you're thinking about the policing side, and then you're also thinking about the corrections side, which is what we've had for the last couple of chapters. And so, again, the prosecutors, they're responsible for trying the cases, and then you have the judges who decide the sentencing, and then and then you have the police who are the ones who arrest them, that, give the charges to the prosecutors, and then once the judge sentences somebody, if they're found guilty, then it's up to the correction system to manage that person. And so here is when the judge makes the decision as to what's going to happen to this person. And when you guys delve deep into this, and you'll get a lot of this in criminal justice and law. But again, a lot of factors are going to weigh into a judge's decision, like we've talked about before. They're going to be looking at psychological evaluations, school records, general past behavior, other people vouching for them, whatever it might be, to weigh into these decisions. But once a judge decides, okay, this person is to be sentenced, they'll look to the law, see what's within their limits, then they'll make at their discretion within the law what they think is the best plan. Should it be confinement in a prison or a juvenile prison? I don't even know if they call them prisons. I have to look that up for some reason. Oh my gosh. Every time you're giving a lecture, you're like, man, why am I always learning new things in the middle of this? Someone quick, pull out your phone, bust out the Google. I don't want to interrupt this, and I don't have my phone in my pocket to find out. So whatever you would call that, it could be a county jail. It could be, a prison. I have to look that one up. Again, they're probably housed in many other places, but that could be one option. But then again, sometimes they, decide, okay, you've either served your time, or we're going to try probation first before we put you in jail. And on that, you are released from the jail confinement if you were in that, and then you are placed under the supervision of a probation officer. Other times it might be decided that you need to go for some psychiatric treatment. So they might work out some plan where you can work with the state hospital or something within your insurance or whatever it might be to work that out. Other times it might be drug and alcohol and abuse programs. A lot of people that are struggling with juvenile delinquency, they get into it because of the abuse. It could be things like that. A lot of kids struggle with not having a home. Okay. And so as a result, the state often has to, make some decisions as to what's going to happen. Are we going to put this kid in foster care? Are we going to put this kid in some kind of a state institution? Should it be a group home? Should it be something like a halfway house? And your book has a couple of terms for that. But halfway house is the one that I always grew up hearing. So you have all of these services that are alternatives to institutional placements and keep juvenile delinquents out of training schools, jails, and adult prisons. But again, that's up to the judge. It could be training school's the best for that kid, send them somewhere to get skills. It might be that the jail is the best, and it might also be that adult prison is the best, or maybe probation is best, or maybe residential or day treatment is the best, or maybe, whatever it might be. So again, this is where we have to make our decisions. And how do you make that decision? Again, we have laws, we have, ranges that we can sentence people. And then again, the judges have their discretion in the end that is influenced by all these other people having weight, okay, including the probation officer's evaluation. So, Yeah, there's also there's reception and diagnostic centers your book talks about, places where they go to figure out what to do. Maybe the judge doesn't know, so they send them to maybe get evaluated, see a psychiatrist, and they can decide what's best for them. There are ranches and forestry camps where kids are sent to these camps, group camps, and there's just a typical camp life, but what are they getting there? Maybe some positive interaction, learning some skill development, getting taught, maybe getting back into school and getting a plan there. Um, yeah, your book also talks about boot camps, sending kids to these very high discipline boot camps, group homes. And we'll talk a little bit later about the problems associated with public and private group homes and training schools also. So probation permits juvenile offenders to remain in the community under the supervision of a probation officer, which is subject to certain conditions imposed by the courts. Again, if somebody has decided they don't need to go to jail, or maybe they don't need to go to any of these other things, they can go to their probation officer. But again, if the judge or whoever sentences them to go to some of these programs, it's the probation officer that verifies that they've actually done this. So sometimes you go to jail and they might be ordered to go to drug and alcohol counseling and get something signed. And then the probation officer makes sure that they're going to their appointments or whatever they're supposed to be doing. That's, part of the judge's conditions. And then if they don't fulfill those conditions, the probation officer can make the decision to send them back to jail. But again, the goal of probation should be the reintegration. How do we get these people back in the community, help them get a job, knock out all these things they got to do to flatten out their sentence, and then find a way to, learn positive behavior to not make the mistakes that got them in there in the first place. They also can continue sanctions, such as if the probation officer decides that the juvenile offender is not, going along with the conditions of the court, they have the options to, send them back to the judge to make decisions, or even send them back to jail until the judge can see them. Then there's the side of restorative justice and peacemaking, helping in making sure and verifying that, the juvenile delinquents are engaging in what probably is ordered by the judge, but whether it's victim healing, offender reintegration, community restoration, paying people back, whatever it might be, that's all up to the judge, okay? But then the probation officer will ensure that happens. It could be things just like random drug screens or whatever it is. But your book has some of these pictures, like, kids can get sent to the group home, residential placement, and where juveniles are assigned either while on probation or released from a training school, date treatment programs, non-residential programs that do not provide living and sleeping quarters, wilderness programs, use the wilderness, desert, sea, and urban areas in order to allow participants to gain self-reliance to prove one's worth and define one's personhood. So the operation of probation services involves intake, investigation, and supervision. Again, the probation officer is going to get all the information from the court. They're going to investigate the case and make sure that the juvenile offender is following through with things, and they're going to supervise them throughout this process. So again, probation permits juvenile offenders to remain in the community under the supervision of a probation officer, subject to conditions imposed by the court. They, take the individual in, they decide what to do with that person, whether it should be strict probation, unsupervised probation, they have those options. Again, they investigate, they look at the social history report and the judge's conditions and decide what to do. And then they supervise them. They're responsible for the behavior of the youth violating probation. Programs fostering risk control and crime reduction, including restitution and community service, intensive supervision, house arrest, and electronic monitoring. They also engage in these. Intensive supervision. This proposed model integrates the central components of strain control and social learning theories. Again, asking the question of what causes people to engage in this in the first place, and how can we help them so they don't engage in this in the second place, such as, whatever it might be, poverty, access to jobs, skills. Do people need social control without supervision? What are they going to be like? And then social learning theories that, through the socialization process, we observe and perceive things in a specific way that influences our decisions and what we think are right and wrong, etc. Again, this contends that the combined forces of inadequate socialization, strains between educational and occupational aspirations and expectations, and social disorganization in the neighborhood lead to weak bonding to conventional values and activities in the family, community, and school. Again, weak bonding. How do we bring these people back into the fold? How do we get them connected? How do we reduce enemy, the disconnect from society, disconnect from groups, and not necessarily turn to countercultures to compensate for that loss, right? Weak bonding leads youth to delinquent behavior through negative peer influence because if they're not accepted by the general society and they're not having a good home life and, they're getting exposed to drugs and whatever else, where's that going to lead you, into the probation officer, the corrections, they're going to have to deal with that too. And most people, when they get out of jail, they get sent right back into that main life. And so how many people continue to come back and violate the terms of their probation, for example? So integrated strain control paradigm. This proposed model integrates the central components of strain control and social learning theories. Again, we've just talked about all of this, but it's just an interesting idea that, we can combine all of these theories to account for why people are doing what they're doing and then how we can best help them and treat them and ensure that they don't fall back into this. But if we look over at this chart, so sorry, I just need to move this picture of myself here a little bit. Again, what's going on in these people's early childhood? What's going on in the family? What's going on in the world that they're seeing? What's going on in their head? They have an actual physical problems in the brain. That's always a consideration. But again, what is leading people down these paths, right? Are they getting good role models? Are they tapping into positive institutions? Are they having good outcomes with sports and school and friends and family and things along these lines? And then the more connected we can hold them. And then accountability is also a factor because, again, if we don't give people accountability, what happens? So these community level forces of having a community that holds people accountable, that looks out for their young, I guess is the way to put it. Like if you look back in the 90s, everyone was just running the streets, going wild. Is that why crime was higher? And then everybody got a phone, and all of a sudden crime just drops off the earth. So how has our bonding changed in modern times? Instead of necessarily bonding with each other, we're bonding with our phones. So you could argue that society in general has weaker social bonds. However, it's not necessarily leading to more crime, but it is leading to things like depression. Just another side conversation. So your book starts opening up the questions, what's it really like in these institutions? What's it like for these kids? But then again, just think about the typical juvenile offender, right? Here they are, they get busted. They have to go to jail, maybe get a lawyer, maybe they get a good defender, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't have the money to pay for one, so they're stuck with a public offender who doesn't, care. Or maybe they're lucky and their parents got some money who can throw down $5,000 in cash to maybe reduce all the problems. But again, what's it like for the average kid? Who is the average juvenile delinquency? What's their socioeconomic status? What's their educational attainment level? How well are they doing in school? What's their friends like? You know what I mean? So here they are, they get in trouble. Now they have to go in front of a judge. People decide what's going to happen with them, and then they have to accept those consequences. And they might have already had to go to jail when they got arrested, and they might have been stuck in there for a little while until they got bonded out. Or maybe they didn't get a bond and they were stuck in jail the whole time until their court date, until the state decides what to do with them. So again, what's happening to those juveniles while they're in these jail systems? And let's say they don't go to jail, or even if they did go to jail, all right, they go in front of the judge, they get their sentence, and what's it going to be? Is it going to be more jail? Is it going to be adult jail? Is it a serious enough offense like murder or some violent crime that is going to put them in an adult jail? Are they going to have to go to some drug court kind of a program or a drug and alcohol rehab? Are they going to have to go into a mental institution and get some lockdown therapy just to really work out maybe some behavioral issues that they're having? Are we going to send them to a group home where they can live and have people look out for them and feed them and stuff because nobody else can take care of them? Do we need to send them to a training school where they can get skills? But again, your book delves into what's it really like. And yes, sometimes they get to watch movies and sometimes they get a nice meal, but a lot of times they're living off bean trays and, they're being exposed to incredibly violent and dangerous environments. And again, the studies paint a frightening environment of what it's really like, right? And so I put the picture in here from the book of the three rights of juveniles to be free of cruel and unusual punishment, access to the courts, and the right to treatment, when they're committed to a juvenile institution, like considering their physical and mental health. But again, can the institutions expose them to cruel and unusual punishment? Is that, I mean, the goal is not to be cruel and stuff like that. But again, think about some of the things you can get exposed to. And so, you can apply functionalist theory here and look at manifest and latent functions. Yes, the overt purpose of the institutions are to maintain social order and to provide justice, whether it's restorative or punitive. And yes, we feed people and, we have showers and sanitation and all of these things. But at the same time, you get exposed to the jail environment or the institutional environment or the foster home environment. And sometimes it's not always great. Sometimes foster homes can be rough. Sometimes they don't get along with the other kids in the foster home. Sometimes they bounce from foster home to foster home. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe they've been homeless in the past. Maybe they've experienced trauma in the past and they're already struggling with trauma. And now here they are in a juvenile delinquency center and their brains aren't even fully developed yet. So here they are, like growing, trying to make sense of reality. And now they're locked in an institution. What's the psychology of it all? What's going on in the heads of these juveniles? And then how are these experiences affecting them? Is it setting them straight? Or is it teaching them the culture of jail? Is it exposing them to a whole new network of people to go get in trouble with the second they get out? Again, there's so much to think about, and I could just go on for days, obviously. How long have I been ranting about this? Because, it's deep. And then every person has their own experience. Some people can cope with the jail life. They're quite comfortable getting up with the breakfast, having their oatmeal. Then they, watch some Wimbledon tennis on the TV. They get their sandwich for their lunch, play some cards, and then, maybe take a nap. Then you get your 4 o'clock dinner in jail. I think it's like 4 o'clock. And then, then you maybe catch a movie and then read some books. Maybe it's, peaceful and, maybe you can go to some religious service or catch an AA meeting while you're in there or some crafts or, some college class if you're in there for a while. But maybe you're seeing a lot of other dark stuff too. Maybe it's not always bells and whistles. I mean, look how they portray it in the movies or TV, They don't usually paint a pretty picture of the institutionalized life, okay? And so again, institutionalization in itself can have some pretty detrimental effects on people, or it can be very positive, depending upon where you go and the quality in the institution, okay, which I'll talk about in a second. So also we have juvenile aftercare objectives. What happens when they're being released? Do we just throw them back into the world? So releasing residents from confinement at the most favorable time for community adjustment. When is it okay to release someone? How do we evaluate that? And so when you're dealing with prisons or whatever, maybe you come up for parole after a certain amount of time, or maybe you're sentenced to 2 years, but you can flatten that sentence in 11 months or 7 months or whatever it is. And so there's a board that decides that, the judge decides that, it gets put into your sentencing. It's based upon how you did in jail and all kinds of other factors that can be considered. But again, what happens when we release them? Do we just throw them back in the streets, back in the culture? And generally the answer is yes. So what can be the effect? Does that contribute to recidivism? You know what I mean? Are they going to keep coming back because they just nothing's really changing? Are they getting what they need out of jail? Has it set them straight? Do they all of a sudden have a new outlook on life and all of a sudden they're like, I'm so positive, I'm never doing that again? I mean, that's the goal, right? But is that the general experience for both youths? Okay. Prepare youth for the successful community completion of aftercare. How do we reduce the crimes committed by reduced juveniles? How do we get them to stop doing it over and over and over again? How do we reduce the violent acts committed by released offenders? How do we increase the confidence of the community in the system that we have? How do we alleviate overcrowding in training schools and jails and whatever it might be? How do we monitor youthful offenders as they refrain from trafficking in or abusing drugs? How do we discourage the return of youth to street gangs? Again, the social environment, and then having access to education and job prestige and wealth and being exposed to a positive environment with positive people, with positive things that make you feel good in the end. How do you build self-esteem and self-competence and self-worth, you know? How do you teach somebody the skills that they need to go out into the world and make it in a society where sometimes you have to be formal and not always talk slang, you know what I mean? And so, does every kid have a fair shot? Do we invest in every single kid the same way? You know what I mean? And that's again, what are the solutions to the social problems of poverty and crime and educational inequality and economic inequality, gender inequality, heterosexism that, you know, contributes to LGBTQ youth being homeless, which then contributes to them committing more crimes and getting involved in drugs and prostitution. And again, it's like a chain, right? And hopefully you guys are seeing that as we wrap up these lecture series. So again, the administration of this entire justice system is mega. You're talking like millions upon millions of dollars, thousands of people to make this work. You have little offices everywhere, little jails, big jails. You have courts in every little county and state and city, and then sometimes within cities, they're subdivided into their own courts, and it gets even more complex. I mean, they have like mayor's courts, they have drug courts, they have municipal courts, circuit courts. You just do the list. It's just too much and complex for me to even open up the door. But again, for this class, we've really just been focusing on the corrections side, so probation, all those other institutions designed for, you know, aftercare, treatment, all these things that we've been talking about, drug and alcohol abuse, you know, you got your, you know, prosecutors, your judges, and that whole administration, and then you have the whole police administration compounded on top of that. So again, mega bureaucracy. But again, how can we solve these problems with efficiency? Again, we pursue, the book has this list: pursue excellence, plan it out. You know what I mean? Do a needs assessment, and then come up with an action plan, and then implement the action plan, and then evaluate your outcomes. That's the goal, right? Because bureaucracies are so efficient at that. Manage the bureaucracy so that it is achieving its goals, right? And in line with the action plan and the mission statement. Having professionalism and not dehumanizing people, being clean and orderly, and having clean and orderly institutions that are really positive and not these dark, scary, evil places full of violence and people putting soap in socks and beating other kids with it, because that's the stuff that happens. And then the sexual violence and everything else. You know, gang rape, all that happens in these institutions. Have a safe place for the youth and the staff, okay? Treat people with dignity and respect, have good quality programming. And that means not programming on TV, but like skill development, education. How do we help them complete their high school? How do we get them started in some college classes? How do we get them in a trade school? How do we get them certified as an electrician or a plumber? Any of these things that can make them tons of money. And then if they make money, they won't need to commit crimes, right? That's the goal, you think? I mean, that's not true at all, because of course people with money commit crimes, but it totally reduces your likelihood to commit crimes having a little money in your pocket. Having community accountability, scheduling services and upholding that, having clean facilities and accrediting these things. Your book finishes out with what really happens when you send the juveniles to adult prison. So again, just imagine everything you see on the TV and the media, and a lot of it's based in reality. Yes, of course, it's exaggerated, but and then just think about the whole list of what I just said about what it's like going in the institutions, right? And then if you're a juvenile, underdeveloped, your emotion levels are not there. You don't probably have the street skills and the wisdom to be able to interact efficiently at that age while dealing with adults who have much more experience, could potentially be much more violent, dangerous, could potentially be much more physically strong, just simple years on this earth. Okay, so again, they become very vulnerable to sexual victimization, physical assault, and it is associated with an increased recidivism after confinement. Again, these adult prisons, institutions, if they're not efficient at rehab and rehabilitating them to where they want to be good people that don't commit crimes, if they're not giving them the skills that they need to go back in the world, if they're just thrown back into the world with no money in their pocket and expected to make it right after prison, again, what happens? But again, the reasons for transfers of juveniles to adult prisons include the age of the offender, the seriousness of the offense, failure to benefit from the programs they might have tried earlier, and poor institutional adjustment. Okay, so again, as I was saying, the judges, prosecutors, everyone will take this kind of stuff into consideration. Also, a violent attack on a staff member can get you sent to adult prison. Yeah. So, but again, you can use your imagination about what it's really like in these institutions, and then go study the qualitative research. We've gone out and asked people. There's so much qualitative research on what it's really like. So again, explain the impact of institutionalization in general on juveniles, right? Think about us as biological animals. We are violent. We are potentially very dangerous, especially if cornered in places. And sometimes we have the fight or flight response, and that is likely going to be triggered in the institutions. And that in general has a pretty detrimental effect on stress in the body and things along those lines. Psychologically, what was going on in your head, again, like I was saying, when you're in these institutions, how are you feeling? How are your emotions? How are you coping? What's your sense of acceptance? Are you experiencing a positive social context in these institutions, or is it dark and scary? Is it tough? Is it hard? Are you yourself dealing with some emotional problems and struggles, and then you're really struggling just to get by in these institutions? What if you had trauma in the past and you're having to live through it? Well, I don't know, just so many things that we could talk about here. But again, just imagine yourself in these situations. What's it like? Go read the research. What's it like? What's it like being locked up? What's it like being confined? What's it like being supervised by people other than your parents or your guardians, or your grandmother? What's it like being in a group home? What's it like being tossed from foster care to foster care? What's it like slipping through the cracks of the system? What's it like feeling like no one cares? What's it like feeling like you're rejected or stigmatized? How does all that affect your overall life outcomes? You know, life chances. How do you increase your life chances? Get that education, get the skills to get that job or whatever, to get that money, to get that access to rise your way up. Also having to overcome racism, sexism, heterosexism, ethnocentrism, anti-Semitism, whatever it might be, anti-Arab sentiment, anti-Asian sentiment, also will block your access and also influence crime. It's complex. Thank you.